Thank you, Anda and Lara, for putting on another amazing event, pulling great group together. I love a room where I hear the word storytelling and content over and over again. I have this thing when, like, even at work, if somebody says content on the other side of the floor, I'm like, oh, a clicker. Yeah, that'll help. Somebody says content on the other side of the floor, I'm immediately, like, my head spins around. And so I walked in here and I was getting a little bit this morning like, oh my God, I keep hearing my favorite word that I actually don't like, but I love what it represents. Also, by the way, some people apologize for being the last speaker between you and cocktails. Nuh-uh, this is gonna be much better than cocktails. And screw the people who left, don't even tell them what happened if they ask. Don't tweet about it, they don't deserve to know. So, let's get going. Does anybody know who this guy is? Wow. So just about 60 years ago, this guy named Bill Bernbach had a pretty transformative idea. Up until that point in advertising, copywriters were the kings. They basically wrote an ad, and when they were done and thought that the copy was perfect, they sent it down to the art department, and whoever was free would attach an illustration in some form or video. And Bill Bernbach had the then relatively radical idea of elevating the art directors to the same level as the copywriters, basically putting them in equal place and declaring essentially that art and copy were both equal and necessary in the making of magic. And that pairing is widely believed to have sparked the creative revolution of the late 50s and early 60s. This ad is a great example of the copy couldn't live without the art couldn't live without the copy, and again, really helped define a new era of creativity in marketing. But it was 60 years ago. That was also the year, just for some context, that the Barbie doll was first launched, Alaska and Hawaii became part of the United States, Qantas flew the first trans-Pacific flight, and Fidel Castro took control of Cuba. So a lot has changed in the world in the 6 decades since then. Technologies have changed, people have changed, media has changed, habits have changed, but this one thing has not changed at all. In fact, it remains very true at most agencies that when a brief comes in from a brand, it's given to 1 or 2 or 3 pairs of art director, copywriter teams who then go off and decide to have a big idea. When smoke comes up and they've got the big idea, they then might actually share it with other people. It's usually a TV commercial, by the way, punchline. And they may even allow other people to have an opinion on it or possibly an idea about how it can be sliced down, and a still from that commercial can go on to, you know, whatever those social feeds are or whatever happens. This is really still the way it's done at most agencies. And again, it was a revolutionary thing 60 years ago, but with all due respect to Bill Bernbach and to Don, who's meditating on the beach now, the Mad Men days are truly behind us at this point. The next creative revolution, the one that's happening now, depends on a redefinition of creativity and the tearing down of artificial barriers that separate so-called creatives, and by the way, I have creative in my title, I also have content in my overly long title, separate those so-called creatives from other people who are equally creative in the things that they do, whether that's through data science, technology, or other forms of creativity, such as content, such as experience design, graphic design. All of these things have to come together and unite, because the future belongs not to agencies with creative departments, but to agencies that are creative. Before we go fully forward, though, I'm going to take another quick step back. I wasn't actually alive when these things happened, so don't assume that just because I'm old, I'm talking to you about old things. I mean, I was alive soon after they happened. But around the same time that Bill Bernbach was shaking up the agency business, this newfangled invention called television was beginning to come into its own. And as with radio before it, TV relied heavily on brands early on, not to advertise on their shows, but actually to produce them and sponsor them. That's why we had soap operas from P&G, that's why we had the Hallmark Hall of Fame, Texaco Star Theater, and Colgate Comedy Hour. Of course, brands eventually stopped doing that. They stopped producing those 30-minute shows in favor of producing 60-second ads that then ran during shows that were produced by the networks, A, because it was cheaper to allow it to work that way. It was more more financially beneficial to the networks, and it was also a way to avoid things like the quiz show scandals. Go to Google. I don't have time to explain that to you right now. But that model held until the early days of reality TV, when product placement came back into favor, initially as a fear-based response to TiVo and the whole idea that ad skipping was coming, and that if audiences could just go past the ads that were in the shows, maybe the only way around that was to actually put your product into the show itself and try and integrate it there. Sometimes okay, usually, as you all know, done in a ham-handed way, not particularly of great value to the audience in most cases. And product placement eventually began to take on more sophisticated forms when brands began to realize that this wasn't just about the fear-based reaction, that there was something bigger happening long-term, which was that intrusive, interruptive forms of advertising were going to become less effective and less efficient because people didn't want advertising. They showed that over and over again, blocking it, skipping it, paying a premium. Most people pay a premium to Spotify not to get access to better music, but just to skip the ads. And by the way, audiences just didn't like them, and most advertisers and brand marketers will admit that. I have a client who calls me every week and goes, nobody wants to see a TV spot for my company ever again. What are we going to do? So brands began to move to a more sophisticated form of marketing where they would actually try to make things that people would choose to spend time with. That's BMW Films, and by the way, it has the distinction, I think, of being probably the only effectively car commercial in the world in which somebody bleeds to death in the back of a vehicle. Doesn't really happen too often in the 30-second spot world. So BMW Films, which came out in, I think, 2003, I'm actually in the same century now. So this is getting really exciting, was a big breakthrough, hiring top-name directors like Guy Ritchie and John Woo and talent like Clive Owens and Madonna to appear in films that were basically as riveting as anything else you would see in a movie theater or on television. And that led to a kind of rise of an everything old is new again marketing mentality that initially was called branded entertainment, still goes by lots of bad names like that, like content, et cetera. And I apologize in telling you that I contributed to that trend in the early 2000s by writing a book on the intersection of marketing and entertainment and where this was all going to go. So today, branded entertainment is just one of a series of tactics and strategies and initiatives that all come under this bigger umbrella, that's my Brooklyn, sorry about that, umbrella of what we call, again, the very awful word of content.
Content. Content. Content. Content. Content.
Content.
Content.
So not content.
Content.
I don't know which one you want me to say.
Not even going to give you context on what was going on there, but I just love that clip. It's something we made for Digitas Newfront a couple of years ago. Although basically creatives make content and content is often creative, the relationship between those two things has hovered somewhere between tense and non-existent. Media agencies use content to bring forward creative ideas to clients, basically crossing into the swim lane of creative agencies and pissing them off. Creative agencies, many of them formed content practices, which they then quickly disbanded because the creatives saw these new content people come in and went, wait a minute, we make content, what are you supposed to do? Dozens of specialist agencies popped up all over the place. Talent agencies and consultancies came out of the woodwork, everybody trying to get marketers to believe they were the right partner and they were the ones who were going to help them not get their pockets picked when they went to Hollywood. And those of us who made a living in this area called content found themselves constantly answering questions like, what the hell is content anyway? What's the difference between creative and content? Did I ask you yet what content is? Isn't everything content? And can you get me tickets to the American Idol finale? So my short answer to the question of what was content was something that was a bit confrontational, admittedly, to traditional creatives, which was it was making of things that people actually wanted to spend time with. And of course, we know that the greatest ads in some ways were always those things, but it wasn't the mentality. There was this mind shift set where you had to stop thinking about, I'm going to interrupt the conversation and talk about what I want to talk about and talk about myself, and instead I'm going to try to develop something that people will actually seek out, spend time with, and share. And it became, I thought, a very valid way to draw the line between how we think about things, and frankly, even now, whenever we create even something that's going to run in a more traditional commercial format, that same thinking has to go into it. What will make somebody want to spend this time as opposed to going off to do something else? And, you know, as I said, the best ads have always been great content. The best content has always been great ads. So, again, the difference now is that the need to deliver those kinds of stories to an audience, things that they want instead of things that you want to put in front of them, is actually now a need rather than a luxury, because today's audiences are more empowered than ever to bypass advertising and marketing in many forms. Sorry, my page, I'm actually reading some of this, as you've probably noticed from my look down, had jumped itself forward. So in addition to, these new forms of content that are coming out, there were other people at agencies who began to view themselves as creatives. They included producers who shoot and edit work, the experienced designers who build the apps and sites and utilities that make life more friendly and interesting to humans. It even included the people charged with the emerging technologies such as AR and VR and voice and new ways of telling stories and creating experiences and interacting with audiences. And it even includes the data people whose job is essentially to go through mountains of numbers and figure out that those are actually humans in disguise. And segregation of skill sets is something that we were guilty of at Digitas. We had a creative department, a content practice, an experience design practice, and a production department, and they were all in separate silos. They worked together in theory, but in fact, in theory more often than in practice. There was goodwill, but there was muscle memory that continued to basically pair the art director and copywriter and send them off to offices that kind of smelled like college dorms to come up with what they called the big idea. But as I said a few minutes ago, the world has changed, and it's time for us to change as well. Us being Digitas, us being the agency business, us being the marketing industry as a whole. And that means tearing down the artificial walls and barriers between creative and content, between creative and experience design, between data, strategy, technology, and creativity in all of its forms to deliver innovative solutions and one-to-one communications. It means being dynamic and agile, not dynamic meaning I'm changing the copy on an ad from one thing to the other, but dynamic meaning audiences are changing constantly and we have to be agile and change how we deal with them and keep pace with them. And when we do that effectively, we become able to deliver game-changing work, like, for example, Small Business Saturday for American Express, which became a national holiday, and like some other things that I want to show you in a minute. But we're more, in some ways, disconnected than we've ever been, despite being in a connected age. And we're looking at how we can use content, storytelling experiences to connect people. And at Digitas, we call that missions and means. And it basically means that brands have, we believe that the future belongs to mission-driven brands that give people the means to act. That it's no longer enough to just tell people the story of what you stand for. You actually have to act that way in the world and give them a way to participate in that. If you're being sharp-eyed, I was meant to change this slide and got sent the wrong version. Put that definition under that one, that definition under that one, if you're trying to figure out what that means. But it's basically ultimately about stories and experiences that move people and bottom lines. It becomes this judgment and filter where we talk about, is something worthy of a person's time and a brand's investment? And when it all works well together, it leads to things like this.
In order to identify our hater, we looked to artificial intelligence, creating a custom machine learning algorithm which allowed us to analyze Twitter conversations of millions of Sprite's followers. We trained the algorithm to classify tweets as either offensive or non-offensive, differentiating the haters from the non-haters. Then we applied natural language understanding techniques to our database of haters, identifying 5 relevant topics of aggression: trolling,
Rata inmunda, escoria de la vida, adefesio mal hecho.
body shaming,
El peor miedo del embarazo es terminar gorda, fea y desaliñada como vos.
gender warring,
Das asco, deberías estar en un féretro.
ideology,
Insípida, vieja católica, dinosauria.
identity.
Sos el puto más puto que he visto en mi reputísima vida.
Only one hater had insulted across all 5 topics, attacking 565 people with more than 1,000 tweets over the last year. His Twitter handle, Aguante el Cofler.
All you need is love, love. Love is all you need.
That to me is a great example of what happens. You listen to the beginning of that. This was started with AI technology and algorithms, and it ended in something really beautiful and human and touching. And when we get it right, it also looks like this.
Good morning and welcome to the John F. Kennedy Presidential Library. We're here in Boston, Massachusetts today to celebrate a very special event. 50 years ago today, the Apollo 11 mission was on the launch pad. The Saturn V rocket carrying the first humans to touch the moon was ready to go.
And it really was about inspiration, wasn't it?
It was,
It was about
absolutely.
one man's vision for what could happen and then pulling it all together.
John F. Kennedy gave this speech and had this idea, and it was sort of this thing, this seemingly impossible task that we were attempting to accomplish. They didn't think this was going to work. They didn't know that this was possible.
And maybe it made other people think, well, if they can do that, what can I do?
Absolutely.
Right? And then maybe that's what it's all about. That's what it was about 50 years ago, and that's what it's about here today. It was a moonshot.
Absolutely.
And today we're going to do it again, except through augmented reality.
So we've actually got the full scale length of the rocket in front of us, and you can play all kinds of different games.
We also have a really special guest with us today.
We've got Dr. Lupo.
He is a big deal.
Kind of a big deal, honestly,
Yes.
yeah.
You said you wanted to be an astronaut when you were a kid.
My dream job, you know, we all have, a lot of people want to be veterinarians and doctors and stuff.
Sorry, I'm gonna leave this for a second and go back to what I was just, that other video, since it was autoplay. That was actually it wasn't a full case study video, so I didn't want you to have to watch 15 minutes of that live thing. But that was essentially an AR 5-day documentary that we created for the 50th anniversary of the moon landing, in which you not only could go to the JFK Museum and watch this takeoff through your phone of a full-scale 373-foot replica of the rocket. You could do that at home. You could do that off a table. You could do that anywhere you wanted to, but then you could also, across the 5 days of the journey to the moon, listen in at any point on the astronauts and the conversations that they were having in real time with, ground control, watch speeches, clips, get all this other data and information. And again, it was a really beautiful marriage of storytelling and technology to create something new that isn't going to come out of the old model. And if you'll indulge me in one more, and I believe it is the right video, when we get it all right, it also looks like this. Now the video won't autoplay? There we go.
When I wake up in the morning and I find out I have no clean clothes, I usually end up just staying home. When I was homeless, we had no clean clothes because we only had a little bit of money and we used that money for food.
I think people don't talk about not having clean clothes because, I don't know, it makes you want to cry or go home or run away or something. It doesn't feel good.
We wanted to look for a connection between a student having access to clean clothes and improvement in their attendance. That's what the Care Counts program is all about.
We installed washers and dryers into at-risk schools across the country, and we built custom data collection devices and installed them on each of the washers at each of the schools. So before each wash, a student ID was entered into the device, and this data let us see the actual connection between a student having clean clothes and its impact on their attendance.
We originally started this hoping to impact attendance rates. What we didn't realize was the impact that it would have on so much more.
If one story is going to stick in your brain today, I think it could be this one. Whirlpool.
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 Whirlpool. It may seem a bit unusual, a washer-dryer leading to student success, but staff here say they've seen it work and it's changing lives.
They went from kind of being embarrassed to this confidence level of, look at me read.
How I feel with clean clothes, hanging out with my friends. I feel like nothing can stop me.
That's Joe. He's awesome. We love Joe. I'm trying to get you guys really depressed so that you want drinks at the end of this. But again, this was a great example of a really deeply human insight, this link between access to clean clothes and school attendance and dropout rates and ultimately poverty rates and all the other things that stem from that. Then right through to a really human idea that was then brought to life and enhanced with data and technology. Those data collection boxes that you see in there were actually built by our technologists in our Chicago office. They had to figure out on the fly how to do it and how to attach it to the Whirlpool machines. They were going back and forth to Home Depot and coming back and building these things. So that's what happens when you can bring that unique stuff together, that mix of data, creativity, strategy, and technology and media to make more magical things. When you tear down those walls, it's not about making ads anymore. It's not about making pieces of content or crafting artifacts. It's really about creating powerful connections with people. It's about moving from being an agency with a creative department to being an agency where creativity fuels the connection between data and strategy and technology and media. And it's ultimately about producing work that is audience first instead of brand first, work that's engineered for impact in a digital world, and work that touches hearts and inspires actions. And if we get that all right, we'll truly spark the next creative revolution. Thank you very much.